Good evening and welcome to the Livonia Public Schools regular board meeting of August 19th, 2024. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Bonnefield?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mrs. Acosta is here. President Bradford?
Here, we have a quorum. Mrs. Frank, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
My pleasure. Stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening. If you'd like to follow along with tonight's meeting, and you're joining us in person, you can go out those doors and find a copy of tonight's agenda. Hopefully it's the correct one. If you're joining us from home, you can go to our LPS website at www.livoniapublicschools.org. Click on the school board tab, go down to meeting information, and you'll find the meeting agendas there. Click on today's date, and then you'll get to that. Tonight's a regular meeting, or what we call a voting meeting. So if you've tuned in to watch this meeting, you may notice that there's not a lot of discussion happening on those items. That's because we've seen and discussed these items multiple times prior to the meeting, mainly in our study sessions and our committee of the whole meetings. If you wish to hear more regarding these items, we ask that you go back and watch those meetings, and there you'll find some richer discussion and answers to some of your questions. Our committee of the whole meetings are recorded and can be found on our website and via YouTube. One other item I'd like to briefly mention is one of community with character traits, respect. Our students learn, model, and follow this trait every day at school. Our Board of Ed also follows and models this important trait here at the table. We do not always agree with one another, and we have very differing opinions at times, but we treat each other with respect for our differences and in the way that we convey them to each other. You have our word that this board will treat everyone in this room with respect, and we ask that you do the same for us. And with that, we will move on to item 3, communications. And oh, great, we're starting out with 3A, our district update from the superintendent, one of my favorite items of the evening.
Thank you, President Bradford. I'm glad you think that's a great thing. We do too. So we are just getting started, so we have just a few highlights for you, but I'll direct you to our screen. And today was one of our favorite days because we got to welcome new LPS staff. So the first photo you will see as we click onto the next slide. Oh, back one. There we go. We welcomed almost 70 new staff to our new staff orientation today. Our HR team, as usual, did a fantastic job coordinating that, and we were just so pleased to welcome staff who are brand new to education and veterans to education, but new to Livonia Public Schools. So we had teachers and paraprofessionals, bus drivers, secretaries, who else am I missing?
A lot of student service.
Student services folks, absolutely. And I would say a third to a half of the room were proud alumni from Livonia Public Schools. So it was a great opportunity to have our staff there together. We talked about our core 4 priorities. We talked about our district vision and collective commitments. We had an opportunity for our division of instruction to talk about our priority areas with regard to our professional learning teams and our work with our students each and every day. And then this big team had a chance to go in and hear from our partners from the LEA, had a chance to meet folks from the curriculum department and IT, insurance, I'm trying to think, technology, the sub-office, all those types of things. And then they came here to central office. We thought it would be great if they had an opportunity to visit where they may go in the future for PD or where they may go for a payroll question. And so they came here and we had a strolling lunch. And Mrs. Junta and I were very happy to be the dessert location. Yeah, it elicits some excitement, and so we were thrilled with that. But what a great crew. So much energy in the room. We talked about their core values. We talked about the gifts that they bring. And the legacy they hope to leave. So a wonderful day to kick us off. Thank you again to Tony and Jen for doing a great job getting us started, to our whole cabinet team for welcoming this crew in today. So you'll see a couple more pictures here as we go through the slideshow. We had some presentations in the Flex Room. Thanks so much to Frost. A shout out to Brian and Shannon for hosting us. And then this was a hit last year, and I think it continues to be. We had a signing table, so just like those who enter the big leagues, there is no more important profession than public education. And so I truly believe that to the tips of my toes. And so we had a signing table, so they signed on the dotted line, and we were able to take photos of each of them. We'll share some of those on social media, but a great way to have them become part of our staff family. We introduced them to our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging mosaic. They had a chance to meet with other colleagues. Of course, there was some LPS swag. So it really was a wonderful day with our new team, and we welcome them. Speaking of kickoff, as always, we have our ALT kickoff in August, and we did that on August 8th this year. This is, of course, our cabinet team, the team I rely on each and every day to help us lead this school district. They are just such a tremendously hardworking group of individuals, and all summer this team was focused on the start of this school year. And so I want to thank each of them, those amazing folks to my right who helped us get ready and to get our leaders ready to do the work in each of our schools and departments, right? Because they're then touching those people who make the magic happen with our students. So it was a wonderful kickoff. We talked a lot about, again, our priorities for the year and who we want to be as leaders when we talk about serving the folks across our school district. So the next few slides just show some of the interaction going on when we talked about where we think we are on key initiatives in this district, and what action steps we could take to move the needle forward. Of course, talking about student achievement and a wide variety of other topics. So great to have all of our leaders together for that. As you know, it was Bounce Back to School last week. If you were not there, you missed the fun. Our LPS Foundation is the recipient and also a big part of the planning for our Bounce Back to School. We had hundreds and hundreds of very happy kiddos. With the petting zoo that was there, the face painting had a huge line all night. The DJ kept us moving. The robotics team is always engaging, and so it was a wonderful night. We changed up a few things, and we had it back at Riley this year. But a great, great turnout, and wonderful to see so many LPS families. And thank you to all of our volunteers. Everyone in those teal-colored shirts served as volunteers throughout the evening and throughout the day. And here were two other key groups of volunteers. We had the Franklin baseball team and the Stevenson hockey team. So the Stevenson hockey team helped get us set up the first couple of hours. And last year, one of the things we said as we were schlepping cases and cases of things and folding tables at 9 o'clock at night, we said, wouldn't it be great if one of those groups came in at the end of this event? And so here came the Franklin baseball team and Coach Matt Fournier and his lovely wife Tammy, and they were the cavalry. I'll tell you what, they were carrying 10 stacks of chairs in each arm. They had tables. They had the energy to go. So always great to see the ways that our kids give back. You're going to see a little bit more of that in this presentation. But thanks to those two crews, we appreciate that. So we had a Sunshine Football Clinic. Livonia Churchill and some of the Plymouth teams hosted their 10th annual football clinic, and a ton of fun was had by our younger students who come to any of our clinics, whether it's volleyball, soccer, tennis. Most of our teams host these, and I have to tell you, it's just such a great way to get our young athletes involved and to see what they have, whether they're going to be a Charger, a Patriot, or a Spartan. It's great to have them in during the summer to do that. Here you'll see some other students volunteering. Here's the Frost NJHS. Many of our Falcons were there spending a day sprucing up the courtyard and the other green spaces prior to they had their school walkthrough last week. They did a beautiful job. If you have a chance to take a look, you'll see their handiwork in action, and we're always grateful for that extra hand that they want to give back to their school. And speaking of giving back, we have the Stevenson hockey team again. I think Coach Mitchell has something to do with this. We had the hockey players spent a morning at Holmes. They were painting some weight equipment and other things that will be utilized by the middle schoolers at Holmes. And so spent some time sprucing that up and having it looking good as our middle school athletes come back. We are just starting with walkthroughs. I know Frost had their walkthrough last week. I believe Holmes is on Friday. Emerson is, I know Mr. Rivera's here, Friday as well. And then our 5-6 schools are hosting our Fire Up 5th grade days and evenings. So please take a look for that. And we had our new school tours last week at our K4s that are not under construction. So we had great turnouts for those as well. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but I'll tell you, some of the competitive hackles have been raised. We have it used to be the old pink card and the forms that would come in that packet that we would beg folks to return, fill out, return to us. And now everything is online. We've made it super simple. But our communications department has created a race to completion. So we are looking for every one of those schools to reach 100%. It is required that every family have their back-to-school checklist completed because that is the emergency contact information, and it's also a sign-off of some really important information that we require from families each year. So we are getting there. You see the growth from the left to the right, but we still have a ways to go for a number of our schools. So anytime you have an opportunity to help us get the word out, we are looking to have 100% completion by Monday. And fall sports season is underway. We have had tennis going and soccer going, and not just practicing, contests already, if you can believe it. So we are ready to cheer on our fall sports teams. We've already seen our Patriots have some success with a couple of medal winners at a tournament this past week in Dearborn, so off to a great start. Can't wait for those Friday night lights, the marching band, the cheer, the pom, the football. It's going to be fantastic. And so we just really want to take a moment and welcome all of our students, our staff this week, the rest of our staff this week, and to thank each and every one of our many, many staff members across the district, no matter your role, for the work that's going into welcoming our kiddos next Monday. One of the best days of the year, the first day of school, and we are just about ready to go. So thank you, President Bradford, for letting me share a few highlights.
Oh, you are welcome. Okay, Holmes, did you see that? You're going to get your kids going on those back-to-school packets. All right. The parents, that's right. That's a tough task. I think you could do it, though. All right, item 3B, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Anybody? Okay. Moving on to item 3C, response to prior audience communication. I do not have any response to prior audience communication. Seeing none. Moving on to item 3D, audience communications. I do not see any blue slips. That's nice. So we do not have any audience communications this evening. So we'll move on to item 4, our consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the special meeting of August 5th, 2024. 5B, minutes of the special meeting Board of Ed workshop of July 17, 2024. 5C, minutes of the regular meeting of July 15, 2024. 5D, minutes of the regular meeting of June 17, 2024. And 5E, minutes of the public hearing of June 17, 2024.
Support?
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, for our consent agenda. Are there any member of the board wish to remove any items prior to us voting? Seeing none, then we can go ahead. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Frank, for our consent agenda. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. We're going to move on to item 6, personnel matters, and I just want to make one note. After item A, we are going to take a few minutes break to honor a special person that we're hopefully going to be appointing in just a few moments here. So item 6A is the appointment of our home's principal. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford?
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Kristen Cousineau as principal at Holmes Middle School.
Support?
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the appointment of Holmes principal. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So I've donned my Holmes Hawk green, having been myself a proud Hawk as a student in the early 90s. And tonight, my Holmes Hawk pride is renewed once again because I get the distinct privilege of introducing our recommendation for a brand new leader for the Holmes community, and that is Mrs. Kristen Cousineau. And in many ways, Kristen requires no introduction. She has served students and led with distinction in this district for over 25 years, but she certainly deserves one, and I'm going to do my best for you. She has been in every triad in the district. She started out at Randolph, teaching at Randolph. She was teacher leader at Cleveland. She taught at Riley. She was the eventual principal of Riley. She was a principal of Grant Elementary as well. Most recent stop, of course, at Webster Elementary. She has answered the call each time the district has asked her to take on a new assignment, and she has done it with professionalism, and she's set a standard. She is a well-earned reputation for being a really strong instructional leader. So she knows what she's walking into and what she needs to do to get kids going academically there at Holmes. But there's an episode I had in mind when I had the privilege of joining Superintendent Oquist for her final round interview. And when the central office complex was being renovated, we had we got bounced a little bit, the cabinet group, to a new location. It happened to be the Riley Community Room at the tail end of the school year. So along comes a Friday morning, and there's music, and we look outside, and there is Miss Cousineau with a gigantic speaker, and she's dancing the kids into the building. And I come to find out it's Fresh Beats Friday. And I was thinking in that moment, and I was thinking again in that final round interview, that's someone who gets it, right? Because the academic piece is why we're here, there's no question. But the climate and the culture in the building is hugely important, and those middle years can be so fun and should be so fun. And this is a person who not only understands that, but really embraces it. And so we're super excited for you to have that chance to be with that group. And she also is going to enjoy a really unique reunion with a group of kids who were 5th graders when she was dancing them into the building just a few years back. So it should be many happy hellos as you enter and join that group. So Kristen prepared for all of this hard work. I'll give you just the rundown of the background there. She has a bachelor in audiology and speech sciences, a master in elementary education, and an ed specialist in educational leadership. And she's been with us ever since, and we're so glad she is. And I wish you congratulations in advance, Ms. Cousineau.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. What I think we'll do now is we will, I'll turn on my mic. We will, I probably don't even need a mic. Anyways, we will go ahead and do the voting, and then we'll make our comments. Let's go ahead and do that. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Burton, for the appointment of Holmes principal. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Thank you. Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. And before she comes up, don't come up yet. Do we have questions and comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
Yes, congratulations. We're as thrilled as I'm sure you are. Speaking from a lot of different perspectives, but I'm going to address one as a parent, because I was a parent in your building with my daughter. This, as I've said when we've appointed other principals in this district, the principal has so many different roles, but one of the most important is to set the tone in the building. And you've got a unique situation in both 5, 6, and in middle school. Those are such transition years, and we all know that. But not only are they transition years for our students, but they're also transition years for our parents. And you did a phenomenal job of helping parents navigate that in and out in 2 years. The first year parents are coming in, they feel a little bit gun shy because they've not been a part of that whole building landscape. And the next year they're already headed on their way out toward another building. You've done a phenomenal job making sure parents feel welcome and have a place in that building and have a place still partnering in their child's education. I'll let other folks speak to other areas of influence that you have, but speaking from a parent, I want to thank you for that. I'm excited to see you take that same character trait that you've had all the way through our district and bring it to Holmes, because it's just so very, very important. And parents are excited partners in their kids' education. They need to feel that, they need to know that, and you do a phenomenal job doing that. So in addition to taking care of our kiddos, thank you for taking care of our families.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Anybody else? Mrs. Frank?
I just wanted to say congratulations. We are thrilled for you, but I also think that you connect with kids in an amazing way. And so these kids that are in 7th and 8th grade, I think that your ability to connect with them and be their friend, but also to be an authority figure is a great asset to the district. And I've seen you do it at all of your buildings. And so we're really thrilled to have you. And I think the kids at Holmes and the staff at Holmes will be so blessed to have you. So congratulations, and we're thrilled to see you step into this. And as a mom, seeing your kids get bigger, I think it's really exciting that you're going to be at a school as your girls get bigger too. So we're thankful for all of you to be here and support her in this role.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Acosta?
Just really quickly, congratulations. As a parent as well, having been in the buildings with you, and also having subbed in the building alongside you, it's such a treat to see you at this level. I think your ability to see students feel seen with you, and I appreciate that so much as a parent. So thank you and congratulations.
Oh, pick me. Okay, I guess. Mrs. Oquist?
Thanks so much, President Bradford. So,
welcome.
Kristen, I've had just such the pleasure of working alongside you for a couple of decades now, and to watch your beautiful family grow, and to have you all here this evening is really, really special. So thank you for joining your mom, your wife, your daughter-in-law with us. But I really want to speak to what I've seen in Kristen, not only as an educator, but as a leader for the past 14 years as a principal. She is a fierce student advocate, and she is unabashed about her advocacy for children, for meeting their needs, for being their champion. And I think that's one of the things I admire and value most about Kristen. I will tell you, she also is a fierce advocate and a huge supporter and a loyalist for her staff as well. And those two things marry together beautifully, because when you have students who are cared for deeply, and that's modeled by a principal, and you're working hand in hand and side by side and walking that journey with your staff, and them knowing that you are willing to do anything that you would ask of them. That balance of high expectation and high support has allowed you to be successful every place you have touched as an educator and as a leader. And I am personally really excited for you. I'm excited for you to have a new journey in your leadership path, and we're thrilled to have that be at Holmes Middle School. So congratulations, Kristen.
Congratulations, and without further ado, come on out.
Now's the time.
Now's the time, that's right.
Hit the red button.
Yep, just tap on it.
test.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you for all of your comments. I am so touched. Thank you, Superintendent Andrea Oquist, esteemed cabinet members, and our dedicated Board of Education. I am grateful for the opportunity to lead the Holmes staff and community. I'd like to acknowledge my family who has come with me this evening, my husband Chris, my daughter Lucy, my daughter Kate, and my mother-in-law Linda. My parents are actually up north, but my mother was a very proud Livonia public school employee for 38 years. So I did want to acknowledge that because she wishes she could be here this evening. It seems like only yesterday I began my career with Livonia Public Schools as a first grade teacher at Randolph Elementary. In the blink of an eye, I'm starting my 26th year. After teaching first, fifth, and sixth grades, serving as teacher leader, acting principal, and the Grant, Riley, and Webster principal, I feel these experiences have paved the way for me to begin this new era with Livonia Public Schools. My roots run deep with the Livonia community, and I'm excited to return to a community that is very near and dear to my heart. I am ready to guide and support the Holmes students at a pivotal stage in their educational journey as they embark on their middle school years. I look forward to and working with and leading alongside a dedicated staff at a school that strives for excellence in education. I would also like to take a moment to express my deep gratitude to the Webster community. Although my time there was brief, I cherished every moment and will always hold the students, staff, and community close to my heart. I want to assure you of my unwavering commitment to the Holmes Middle School students and staff. I will bring the same dedication, commitment, honesty, integrity that I have demonstrated throughout my career. I am excited about the great things we will accomplish together. Let's go get 'em, Hawks.
And I would just like to thank, we have several teachers and administrators from Holmes and other schools here to support. And so thanks for being here. As I understand, you guys are going back to work on Wednesday, so to spend your Monday evening here supporting is just really fantastic. So thank you so much. And we're going to now take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to congratulate Kristen. So we'll be back. Good evening again. We're back after we celebrated our newest appointment to the Holmes principal, Kristen Cousineau. So congratulations to her again. We are going to go ahead and move on to item 6, personnel matters. Item 6B, teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Bonifield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 24-25 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for teachers for approval. And this evening, we are going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you very much. So the new staff members we are presenting to the board this evening fill needs across a wide range of levels and programs in the district, because this represents a good portion of our typical summer hiring initiative for the upcoming school year. All are very well qualified to fill their respective positions, and we are confident they will perform at a high level and represent LPS in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in the 2024-2025 budget. We are pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family. And with your approval, we are excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Are there any questions or comments? We do want to say congratulations, and I believe many of these people on this list were at the new teacher hire today. Yes, so this is exciting. They're probably home in bed tonight because they're so exhausted. But no, congratulations, and they'll be back tomorrow?
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
But I have no doubt they probably will be back in their classrooms tomorrow.
You're probably right.
Set up.
Yep, I would guess that myself. So congratulations to all the new hires, and I guess we better vote on that first. So I have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for teachers for approval. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Gladly. Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Now we can say congratulations. All right, we're moving on to item 6C, teacher for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teachers effective on the respective date. There is a long list. I'm sure I will mispronounce some names, so I apologize in advance if I do. Sarah Agnew, August 26, 2024. Keith Beal, August 30th, 2024. Michael Busk, August 30th, 2024. Rebecca Doobie, August 26th, 2024. Kaylee Edwards, to August 26th, 2024. Diana Goodhue, August 30th, 2024. Ashley Guggen, August 26th, 2024. Amy Halami, August 30th, 2024. Aaron Johnson, August 30th, 2024. Rachel Johnson, August 26th, 2024. Maureen Kim, August 30th, 2024. Ashley Lytle, August 30th, 2024. Carrie Lovall, August 30th, 2024. Gary Mann, August 26th, 2024. Lauren McLinden, August 26th, 2024. Rachel Poe, August 26th, 2024. Mackenzie Simpson, August 30th, 2024. Nicole Steele, August 26th, 2024. Rachel Turchan, August 26th, 2024. Madison Vince, August 26th, 2024. Aaron Warner, August 26th, 2024.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for our teachers for tenure. And this evening, we'll hear from Mrs. Keats.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Our teachers for tenure on this agenda have successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations of overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with the recommendations of our school administration and have verified they should be granted tenure status with the Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer congratulations for reaching this milestone and look forward to their continued success working in LPS.
Thank you. All righty. Do we have any questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
We don't often do this, but I just wanted to say, Miss Vince, Madison Vince, we have all had different experiences with teachers, but she was a first grade teacher during COVID for my Addison, and the way she wrangled these first graders during COVID and their parents who didn't know how to use the computer and didn't know how to utilize things with such calm and kindness as we were trying to figure it out. Addison sat at our kitchen table for days and weeks and months, and Mrs. Vince was this voice that rang through my house, and so I'm so happy that she is going to be granted tenure, and that I think she was a brand new teacher at the time too. Maybe it was her first year during COVID, but she did a phenomenal job, and so I just want to say welcome to all the teachers, but especially Miss Vince. She is a phenomenal teacher, so I'm thrilled that we have her.
Very nice. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, for teachers for tenure. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6D, leaves of absence. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mr. Johns.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the request for a leave of absence as listed below. Melissa Copeland, August 26th, 2024.
Support?
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Burton, for leaves of absence, and this evening we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. So the staff member listed in your documentation is requesting leave in accordance with their collective bargaining agreement, and we ask that you please approve that leave as presented.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mr. Johnson, supported by Mrs. Burton, for leaves of absence. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 6E, resignations. That's for board information only. We will not be voting on that. We'll move on to item 6F, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Lisa Cannell and Catherine Seflick.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, for retirements. And this evening, we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Yes, hello again.
Hello.
Tonight, we honor and congratulate 2 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools. As they leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 61 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for the dedicated years of service they've provided to the students of LPS, and we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolution of appreciation.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Acosta.
When I saw Mrs. Cannell, I think I turned to Mrs. Bonifield and said, no. Not only was she a teacher to both of my kiddos, but I got to be a long-term sub for her as well. And I just really enjoyed just her personal touch and how much she loved on our students. And so she will be missed. Thank you, congratulations. Wishing you an enjoyable retirement.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. I echo those sentiments. Mrs. Cannell was at Hoover when my students, or my kiddos were there. And what a remarkable teacher she is and was and will always be. And congratulations on your retirement. Mrs. Burton.
It's always with such mixed feelings that we vote on retirements. We're thrilled for you that you get to go on to a new and exciting and hopefully a little bit more relaxing chapter for both of these wonderful ladies who have served our district so well. And yet it's so sad because we see what experience and what relationship building that's gone on for decades is walking out the door. But we just want to give you our sincere thank you and a sincere wish for a wonderful, wonderful retirement.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield for retirements. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 7A, the approval of purchase of school buses. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of school buses from Holland Bus Company, Holland, Michigan, for a cost of $452,077.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of purchase of school buses. And this evening, we are going to hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This is a purchase we've discussed a couple of times previously, and specifically, we're looking at two 77-passenger propane buses and one 71-passenger special needs propane bus. The money for this is coming from two different pots. We did receive from the state a grant specifically for more efficient buses, and we'll be using that $170,768 towards this purchase, and then we'll be backfilling the remainder from the 2021 bond initiative, which we did specifically set aside a budget line item to purchase buses. So as we proceed beyond this meeting, you'll be seeing some more of these requests for bus purchases from the 2021 bond initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
Periodically, we get folks asking about grants. And we don't have one grant writer because we have probably in the district dozens of grant writers, and if not more. But just so folks at home know that we do take advantage of grants, and in this case, we're looking at over $100,000 in a grant. Mrs. O'Brien, I think, recently brought in the largest grant that we've seen for books for all of our kiddos. It was really, really exciting. But just know that our folks are on the lookout for grants, and not only are they on the lookout, but they're darn good at writing them, and they succeeded at bringing them in frequently. So if you're looking toward that kind of thing, perk your ears up when we do talk about grants, because it is frequent that across this table we are approving purchases for grants. So thank you to our transportation team and our operations team that went to bat for this one to the tune of $170,000. That is no small amount of money. So. The other thing I wanted to just bring to folks' attention, if you weren't listening to the Committee of the Whole meeting, these are propane buses, and as Mr. Francis went into a lot of detail in our Committee of the Whole, we keep a mix of propane, gas, and diesel buses. It helps even out our ebb and flow of cost of fuel on these buses, and it's good to keep a mix of all three. That way we kind of reap the benefits of all three of them without going exclusively toward one end. If you'd like more details on that discussion, tune into our Committee of the Whole meeting from last week. But thank you to your team for bringing in another huge grant for this.
No, thank you. And our CFO, Mrs. Allison Smith, isn't here right now, but she was also a big part of this as well. So I want to also acknowledge her and Mr. Ross Robert, who is the supervisor of the garage mechanics, and he was a big part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mr. Johnson, for the approval of purchase of school buses. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to item 8, instructional matters. We have item 8A, the approval of purchase of digital licenses for middle school social studies. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of digital licenses from Cengage Learning in Independence, Kentucky for middle school world history and U.S. history for $121,433. This purchase would extend digital access to the current board-approved textbooks of world history, ancient to early modern times, and U.S. history American stories, beginnings to 1877, for 2 years.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of digital licenses for middle school social studies. And this evening, we were going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank
Good
you,
evening.
President Burton. Bradford. I did that last week, too.
Oh, well, that's
Thank
okay.
you, President Bradford.
You're
I am
welcome.
happy to bring this purchase of an extension for our middle school social studies classrooms. This was one of our first textbooks that had an interactive digital license. We got it in 2018, and it had the features in order for it to read to students or make the text easier for students. And so we've been using it for the past 6 years, and we would like to extend that for 2 more years. And just so that you know, the digital platform gets updated and the content for current events is added into it. When you look at what world history and American history we teach at middle school, they are way back in the past, but there's still that connection to current events that the online platform provides us. This purchase will come out of our secondary textbook budget, which has been supported by the Wayne County Enhancement Millage money.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, for the approval of purchase of digital licenses for middle school social studies. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta says yes. Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
President Bradford?
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to 8B, the approval of purchase of decodable readers. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford.
Yes?
No, well, no,
Mrs.
I
Bonnefield?
would like to do that for you.
Did I say that wrong?
I don't think so.
Okay, go right ahead.
No, I'm all psyched out about the name thing.
Good, very good.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of decodable readers for elementary interventionists from the Reading League Shop of Syracuse, New York for $25,257, and from High Noon Books in Nevada, California for $5,390 for a total purchase of $30,647.
Support.
Oh. We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of purchase of decodable readers. And this evening, we'll hear again from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Bradford. This purchase we are excited to make to support our interventionists. So we currently use decodable books in our kindergarten, first grade, and second grade classrooms. And last year, our interventionists worked with Mrs. Fenkel to make sure that they had some of the most current resources to work with students who are below grade level. So this purchase would be for our ESTs and our interventionists in our K-4 buildings and our 5-6 buildings. And this purchase is from the 35J grant that Mrs. Burton talked about a little bit ago, that we wrote into the grant so that we were able to fund some of these additional books for our teachers to use with students.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Any questions or comments before the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Acosta, for the approval of purchase of decodable readers. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and the motion carries. Moving on to item 8C, the approval of virtual student instructional days. May I have a motion, please?
President Bradford,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent to participate in 15-day emergency forgiveness for the 2024-2025 school year.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of virtual student instructional days. And we are going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Thank you so much, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
As we talked about in our previous meetings, I'm bringing forward the 15-day emergency forgiveness. And what that means is on days such as testing days, where some of our students are not in session, we would have the ability to use virtual instruction so we could reach those students so they would receive a day of instruction and we would not be faced with potential penalties of FTE from the state. This could also be used on a rare exception for true emergency situations if we went over our allotted forgiveness days from the state for acts of God such as snow, water main break, power outage, etc. For that purpose, we only would use this in an emergency situation, so we would not have to extend the school year.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
Mrs. Keats, just to kind of expand further on your comments about snow days and so forth, because that always gets everyone's attention
Yep.
right off the bat. We would still be utilizing our normal snow days. This would only be kicking in terms of snow days if we hit our 6th snow day and began to face the possibility of exceeding that. And this is so that we don't have to tack on another day at the end of the school year.
That is absolutely correct. This will not touch snow days as we know it. It would only happen if we had an extremely terrible winter where we took 6 days that are allowed from the state and we needed to go. I'm sorry, knock on wood, that will not happen. And it went above and beyond. And again, an emergency situation.
Right, okay, and frankly, luckily, it's unlikely with where we are located in the state and how many snow days we get, but it's good to know that we have this. Also, one of the reasons that we need this, and we talked about this in the Committee of the Whole meeting, is that the state has notified us that they will no longer be granting an extension of extra days, extra Act of God days, be they snow days or whatever else.
Yes, we run the risk of a waiver not being available for us to apply for, and if we did not meet our attendance thresholds on particular days, we would risk the chance of losing funding for students for that particular day.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Any other questions or comments?
Just one other quick thing. If anybody wants any more detail on this, because we had a really extensive discussion about it in the Committee of the Whole meeting, you may want to go back and look at that meeting online, or as President Bradford said, on YouTube, if you're interested in more detail on this.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, for the approval of virtual student instructional days. Mrs. Acosta, would you take the roll, please?
Yes. Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta says yes. President Bradford.
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to next agenda 9, hearing from board members. We're going to go through a series of first readings of board policy. These do not require a vote until we go into a second reading. So we're going to go ahead and go through 9A, the first reading of board policy, instructional program IDD, family engagement. And I believe we're going to hear from Mrs. O'Brien. Thank you.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
Board policy IDD is, we would like to update it. It is part of our instructional program board policies. We previously had it as parent involvement, and we have worked, the last time we updated this was 10 years ago. We have worked through our MTSS process and had parent groups in our Title I schools and with our MTSS Guiding Coalition, look at this board policy and make sure that it's meeting what we need for today. And so Mrs. Finkel and her team last year worked with a group and provided the changes to this board policy. Overall, in summary, it's changing from just parents to families, because families could be a wide variety. Instead of saying parents and guardians, we chose to use the word families. It also meets the letter of the law under Every Student Succeeds Act, and so we compared what our needs were, and I know we went through the administrative procedures for that during the committee of the whole, and make sure that we have the right updated language in that also. I can read it, or?
Sure, why don't you go ahead and read it, because when we do the second reading, we won't have to take that time to read it at that moment.
The board strongly encourages and welcomes the engagement of families in all of the district's educational programs. It is recognized and appreciated that family members are the first teachers of their children, and that their interest and involvement in the education of their children should not diminish once their child enters the school of the district. The administration shall design a program plan that will encourage family engagement that may include, but not limited to, review of instructional materials, input on the way the district may better provide family members with information concerning current laws, regulation, and instructional programs, and the district offerings of training programs to guide family members on how to become more involved in their children's educational programs. Pursuant to state law, the superintendent or his or her designee shall provide a copy of the district's family engagement plan to all families.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Frank?
I'm just glad that this is in board policy. I think it's really important. Most of us sitting at this board table got involved with the district by getting involved with our kids' elementary schools or volunteering. And so I think it's great. I love the first sentence that the board strongly encourages and welcomes the engagement of families in all the district's educational programs. And so I think just from the board, we welcome and encourage that. And it's up to each building to determine what that looks like and that sort of thing. But I think it's so important for the kids and for all of our educators to have help with from the parents and the families. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Any other questions or comments? Okay, this will be put on for a final reading at our next board meeting. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B, the first reading of board policy instructional program IDDE, post-secondary credit opportunities. And we are going to hear from Mr. Etu.
You are. Thank you very much, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
This is IDDE, Post-Secondary Credit Opportunities. It is a board policy that was approved back in 2012 and reviewed in 2014. We periodically review what the state and federal requirements are for post-secondary opportunities. There has not been many updates to this, but we did want to take a closer look at it. And we did add some legal references at the bottom as well. At this point in time, would you like me to read it in?
Yes, please.
Sure. IDDE, Post-Secondary Credit Opportunities. The Board of Education supports opportunities for pupils to receive post-secondary credit while attending high school. The school district shall provide educational opportunities, including, but not limited to, dual enrollment in the Michigan Early Middle College Program for pupils to earn post-secondary credit while attending high school. And although board book may not show that the comments have been added to the including but limited to, they have been, and we'll be sure that that's part of the next board meeting.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Oquist.
I apologize for not bringing this forward during the committee of the whole, but it did strike me that both of these, save for the funding available this year at the state, are at a cost to our school district. I don't know if, since this is in board policy, this would require us to provide these regardless of our budgetary situation. So would we want to add a phrase in there that referenced that this will take place while we are able to do so based on the fiscal stewardship of the district, or as good fiduciary stewards of the district, this will be reviewed on an annual basis or something in that regard? Would you have any objection to me working with Mr. Etu and adding a phrase that would reflect that and sending that to you prior to our next board meeting?
I think that would be, yes, adequate and important to add that. Mrs. Bonnefield?
I know we added this in, but usually in policy, we make sure that it's the policy changes and not what we're doing. Can we talk just why we added these particular items in the policy and not leave them out perhaps, just so that because we're still asking that we provide post-secondary credit opportunities. If we don't name them, then we don't have to worry if the programs come or go. Not saying that they will.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Would you allow us to take a look at that and,
Yes. Yep.
and
Bring
tweak
it
that
back.
so that
Sure.
we are,
Yeah.
we can sufficiently cover the district in the future? Because with the word shall, it does
Yes.
not leave any wiggle room.
Yes.
And I think, Mrs. Bonnefield, to your point, and I do see that in a different light, in light of this conversation, but I think what we were trying to do was give an example of what that might be.
Okay.
And dual enrollment is a very common practice in order to earn post-secondary credit. And then, of course, recently we engaged in the early middle college. So why don't you let us take another stab at it? We'll get it back to you. We'll talk about it in study session, and then if you're comfortable, we'll bring that back at our September meeting.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Mrs. Acosta, you had a comment.
I know we had a lengthy discussion about the word pupil.
Oh.
And
I saw that as well.
Good
We'll make sure we
Thank you.
change that to students.
That's
Thank
a
you.
good catch, very good. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll just.
As much as we talk about these,
I
right?
know.
We always still see something.
Here we
Yes.
go for the first reading. That's why
Yes,
we have a
that's
first
why we do it.
reading.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mrs. Burton.
And obviously you will be, but we have to consider too what is required by law. This isn't just because we want to, and it's not just whenever the family wants to with a given course. There are procedures we have to go through, but it is required by law that we offer these opportunities. So we'll have to take that into consideration with the wording in the policy also.
Thank you. Okay. All right, moving on to item 9C, the first reading of Board Policy Instructional Program IDDF, Online Learning. And we are going to hear from Mr. Etu.
Thank you very much again.
You're welcome.
So yes, IDDF, online learning, was approved at board policy back in 2012 and reviewed in 2014. Similar to the previous policy we just discussed, we look to make sure that we're up to speed on state and federal requirements. And there's just a couple add-ons and removals from this policy that I can read into the record. The Board of Education supports opportunities for students to experience online learning. The school district shall provide access to online instructional programs for students.
Okay, that was a long one. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding this policy? Mrs. Frank?
Mrs. Oquist, did you say you were going to review this one too? Because this one costs money, or this one is a financial investment, or no?
No.
Not this one, okay.
Okay. All right, well then, we can put this item, IDDF, on for a second reading next week. Or not next week, our next regular scheduled meeting. Thank you. All right, moving on to item 9D, hearing from board members. Hearing from board members is a time we set aside if any board member would like to make any comments. Do we have anybody this evening that would like to speak? Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, President Bradford.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to tell our community on behalf of the LPS Education Foundation how grateful we are for all of the people who volunteered and helped with the bounce back to school last week. It was a tremendous event. It was well attended. There were plenty of happy kiddos bouncing all over the place, and none of it can happen without the hundreds of people who volunteered, whether it was administrators, teachers, parents, community members, students, teammates. Many hands make light work indeed, and in this case, many hands make it happen. It could not happen without our volunteers. This has become a tradition. It's an event that's been going on for years. It's looked forward to by so many families, And without those volunteers, we would have a lot of disappointed people in our community. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was by all measures a success, and the credit is entirely due to our volunteers.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Well said. Anybody else? I would just like to take a moment to, Mrs. Frank.
I think you might say the same thing.
Oh, just, yes, exactly. I just wanted to welcome, we all know that this is the beginning, I call it, it's the most wonderful time of the year when all you parents are sending your children back to school, and our staff is excited, our kids will be excited, I think, or most of them will be. And we just want to wish you a really great year, and know that this Board of Education and supports your families and and works for the needs of you. And also just to the staff that's been here all summer. I mean, we do have year-long workers that have been working tirelessly, registering, and our people that are getting our schools ready. So many different people working for the first day and back to school. So put a smile on your faces and get ready for a great, wonderful year of 2024-25. Anybody else? All right. Does anybody have any other business before the board this evening? Seeing none, have a good evening. We're adjourned.